Here we go. All right. So with us today, we have Alicia, who, Pierre, excuse me, who in talking with our friend Uli, has come up with numerous ways to improve operations. And if we're all focusing on increasing profitability, then we're looking for ways to, whether it's revenue increase or operations increase or efficiencies or customer experience, it's all the things that Alicia's got some ideas on. So Alicia, we're going to turn this over to you. Go from there.
Thank you so much for introducing me, Hal, and for inviting me to speak with you all today. I'm really excited. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And let's see here. Can everyone see a full screen? Business infrastructure basics. Okay, and I'm going to put my glasses.
Looks more like a previous screen. We can see your second screen too.
Oh, you don't see a full screen? Let's see. Let me try
again. Go to presentation mode.
Okay, I'll try again. Let's see. Yeah, I want it to be in presentation mode. So
there you go.
Is this better?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, we are going to talk about some basics of business infrastructure. I will try to get through as much information as I possibly can over the next 7 minutes. Hal, I'm not sure if it's appropriate for people to stop me along the way, but feel free to do so if you have a question as you look at something that I'm sharing. Now, Hal, this picture that you see here already has generated some conversation, and I promise I will explain what the heck we're doing here in this picture as I start to advance through some of the slides. So just really quickly, what we'll cover over the next 7 minutes or so, I'll introduce myself to you all, tell you a little bit more about me. We're going to get into what business infrastructure actually is, how it serves as building a foundation for scale and sustainability in a profitable and a repeatable way. And then we'll actually talk about what does it actually look like, right? We talk about these intangible things that we can do with our back office operations, but at the end of the day, what is it and what does it actually look like? And then I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you might have. So just really quickly, I won't go through everything on this particular slide, but just to let you know a little bit more about me. I have been in the operations space definitely over 20 years. I am a Lean Six Sigma Black Belt. I love all things process. So from process design, improvement, optimization, I do all things process. Also have some project management skills embedded in there as well, but my absolute passion is what I call business infrastructure. And business infrastructure, if you haven't heard of it before, not to fret or worry, because it's not something that's very popular, but thanks to organizations like yours, we are slowly starting to get the word out about what it actually is. Just some quick fun facts about me. I do love traveling around the world. COVID definitely put a damper on that, but I'm hoping to start getting out traveling again later this year. And one of the most profound experiences I've had in my life was when I had the opportunity to work on a restoration project of an ancient temple in Egypt. So that was many years ago, but it really helped me understand all of these concepts of what it means to build infrastructure, business infrastructure in particular, and how when we really take our time to focus on the details and the not so sexy things about business, we really can focus on building something that will last, potentially even outlast us as the owners and operators of our respective businesses. When it comes to business infrastructure, most people, one of two things tends to come to mind because we hear that word infrastructure. So one of the first things that you may think of is IT, information technology. The other thing that most people I've found tend to think of is transportation. They hear that word infrastructure and they instantly go to transportation. So in this picture that you see here, we have highways, byways, there's plane in the air, there's potentially ships, there's rail. All of these are different modes of transportation, and the infrastructure, which comes in the form of of highways, byways, and shipping lanes and all those kinds of things. When you think about it, that infrastructure is really connecting all of those different modes of transportation so that people and goods can move about as seamlessly and as efficiently as possible. Well, when it comes to business infrastructure, it's really the same concept. But in this case, we're talking about connecting or linking the people, the processes, and the tools and the technologies that make your business function on a day-to-day basis. How do you take all of those different elements, link them together so that if there's ever a change in one area, you understand how it impacts or affects all of the other areas. So it links all of those things so that information and work can flow about as seamlessly and as efficiently as possible. Business infrastructure really answers four main questions. Those questions are, what work needs to be done? How is that work organized? Who will actually do the work? And how is that work performed? So we're going to go through the first three in a little bit more detail. The last one, in case you're wondering, is where we really get into processes, the how. But for the sake of today's business infrastructure basics presentation, we'll talk about the first three in a little bit more detail. When it comes to answering the question, what work needs to be done, this really is foundational to everything else that you will set up when it comes to building your organization's business infrastructure. This schematic that you see here in front of you, I want you to imagine that these are index cards, plain white index cards, and every single one of these letters and numbers that you see on each index card represents a unique task or activity that is performed in your organization, no matter how mundane or how complex. One of the first exercises that I take my clients through is to go through the rigor of figuring out everything that you all are doing. But here's the other thing. Don't just document everything that you all currently do, but also document the tasks or activities that you all recognize you need to do, but you may not be doing right now. So once you have all of that out of your head and onto these individual index cards, the next step is to figure out, how is your work actually organized? I want you to ask yourself right now, and maybe you could even put the answer to this in the chat. In your company, do you have actual departments, identified for your company? Even if you may be operating as a solopreneur, can you actually identify the departments of your company? And for those of you that are working for another organization, or you're working within an organization, you all might have those departments defined, but are they defined optimally? So that's the question that maybe you can go ahead and put the answer to in the chat right now. But the schematic that you see here on this slide, so imagine you've taken all of those index cards, very similar to the first picture that you all saw of me with a lot of people when we were all in the same room at the same time. They had these index cards that represented their different tasks and activities. They were then challenged to group tasks that were similar in nature into columns on that table. So what you see here is everything, obviously, that starts with the letter A has been grouped into an operations department. Everything starting with the letter B is technology, D, accounting, and E for marketing. This, again, is just illustrative of what you would do with your company and several of your other team members. You all could potentially get together in one large room, have a large flat surface. It will usually end up being a table. I don't recommend Post-it notes because Post-it notes, the adhesiveness, it doesn't last very long. Index cards are much more durable. You're going to have conversations with each other that you may not have ever had before. You're also going to realize where there may be a duplication of effort. And in some instances, you may realize that the ball has just been dropped completely when it comes to certain other things. You may think that someone else is working on something when in fact, that person isn't working on that task. In fact, no one is working on that task. So that's why it's so important to use these low-tech, high analog tools to try to generate conversations that you all may not have had before. Now, at this point, sure.
I know this is being really picky, but I don't know how you do this in person. But would it be easier, instead of having A for operations, to make the card an O1 instead of an A1 for technology, make it a T3 instead of a B3? Unless you have on the table that in that category, it's got technology in that section of the table that you laid the cards. I know this is very picky, but you're talking about processes. I'm just throwing it out there for future.
Oh, I think you might be misunderstanding. Let me go back to this picture from the very beginning. Sorry for going back so quickly. So you see this picture, right, Paul?
Right.
All of those index cards, there are actual tasks that have been written or typed out onto those individual index cards. What I'm showing you is simply for illustrative purposes.
Okay.
It's just to show that literally anything that started with the letter A, we may say, oh, you know what, after we've talked about it, we would call this Department A.
Okay.
Or we would call this operations, or we would call this finance. It's really just to be illustrative.
Okay.
So I don't know if you can see this in this picture, but there's some little blue cards, index cards that you see here in this picture. Those are the cards that represent the name of the department. So you have to first group the similar tasks together into columns. And then after that, we take another index card, usually a different color. We place it above each column. And that's when the team starts to have a discussion about, okay, if we had to assign this specific grouping of tasks to a department, what would the name of that department be? And that's when they start having conversation. Well, you know, I would call this facilities management, or I would call this information technology. I would call this accounting. Some people might say billing, others might say invoicing. So it's just to start to generate that conversation, but I wouldn't get caught up in, you know, letter A versus that's really just me trying to be illustrative. Normally, if we had more time, I would actually ask you all to do this exercise live during this session, but we just don't have the time right now, unfortunately.
Well, and that may be our takeaway for the next meeting.
Okay. So once you have identified the tasks that are performed in your company, you've grouped them into departments, it's now time to look at each department and its associated tasks and figure out or identify the ideal role that should perform all of those different tasks. So it's at that point, I don't know if you all can see me raising this up right now. This is a stick figure. Yeah. It's a laminated stick figure. This is a product that I've created for my company. This is what we use. So again, very low analog, but very interactive, and it keeps people highly engaged. Here's the thing. You don't write the name of the role who's actually currently performing those different activities. You want to ask yourself, in a perfect world, if you had access to all of the resources that you needed, who ideally should perform that role? And it's at that moment that you're going to realize what you may have been doing as the founder, CEO of your individual organizations. You're really doing the work of 4, 5, 6 different people. So that's the importance of using the little the little stick figures here. And so as you can see in this image, this is me working with a client. This was during COVID. And this is us actually going through the exercise of assigning those stick figures and writing down the name of the ideal role that should perform different tasks. And so finally, we can't, unfortunately, we don't have enough time to get into the processes piece, but the way the processes would work is you would actually look at all of those tasks that are identified per department and try to figure out how to roll those tasks up into processes. The schematic you see here to paint the whole picture of what business infrastructure would potentially look like. You see here on the far left, I've started off here with some gears. They're color-coded, and they're color-coded for a reason. So anything that you see blue, we're just going to say, let's say that represents operations. Anything green, billing, yellow, sales. and red, and anything red represents the deployment department. And then you assign different people or roles to each of those departments. But here's what happens next. If you look up on the right-hand side of the screen where we see the number 2, this is showing how, based on the information that you've come up with on the left-hand side of this diagram, you can now create your company's organizational chart. If we move further down to number 3 and number 4, this is showing how you can show the process. What is your order to delivery process, and how do every person that you've identified as a role who plays an active role in your company, and all of the departments that take part in your company, how do they all come together to provide whatever your product or service is? And I know there's someone who, I think, Paul, you're in the space planning business, so you might appreciate the
Yes.
far right side. So again, so how do you organize your workspace according to these departments that you've carved out, so that, again, information flows as seamlessly as possible? Moving down to part 5, number 5, that's your processes. So for each of these 4 departments, operations, billing, sales, and deployment, there are specific processes that can be documented that would let people know exactly how to perform the work and what the output should look like. And then finally, the 2 icons that you see at the very bottom representing number 6 and number 7, that's just to give you an idea of how you can take this new organizational structure with your departments and organize all of your physical files or your physical records, as well as your digital or electronic records. And this is actually what led Uli to asking me if I would come and speak with you all, because we worked on some work together recently where part of her company's business infrastructure, and I hope she doesn't mind me mentioning this, but my company uses a tool called Notion, for example. And this is where we store all of our processes, all of our digital records. It's not only a wiki, but it's a project management tool. It literally is an all-in-one workspace. But because we now know what the departmental structure of our company looks like, we were able to very quickly go into Notion, set up these individual workspaces, and within each of these workspaces that you see here, operations, marketing, accounting, business development, HR, legal compliance, and IT, we now have our specific processes within each of those main areas. But it would have taken us, yes.
I'm going to jump in for a moment, just out of time for everybody. Can you, because I know we're going to see you in 2 weeks.
Okay.
With the understanding that you're laying out for us, are there some things that we can do over the next 2 weeks? Because one of the things that Paul's helped us pick up on a lot is being accountable. So you've already given us some guidelines and directions on why we need to be doing this, and the benefits that Uli's shared with us for many months. What do you want to, what's our homework for the next 2 weeks?
I would say your homework could be identifying all of your tasks and committing them to, or organizing them into departments. And then a third part of that, if you all have enough time, is identifying the ideal role. Maybe I should just go here really quickly. So if you need a little bit more guidance on how to do that, I definitely recommend signing up for my free LinkedIn newsletter. There's a very specific article that I have about creating a business parts analysis. If you read that article, it's going to tell you exactly how to do that call to action that you're asking for.
Great. All right. So I think that's where we want to kind of pause, because there's a lot here. And I also want to respect both Alicia's time and everybody else's time. That Alicia, I'll reach out to you and we'll get the newsletter link sent to the group. And then what I heard you say was we need to list our tasks, list the tasks and who's doing it, And ultimately, we want to be talking about who the role should be. Is that correct?
So you're going to list the tasks, you're going to group them into departments, and then you're going to identify the person who should ideally perform all those tasks. And the whole point of this, Hal, is to create succinct, transparent job descriptions. That is one of the first outputs of these exercises.
Got it. All right. So in wrapping up, and let's see if we do this right. I'll share my screen one more time to make sure we have an idea of what we're doing. Paul, Donna, Sabine, Ryan, any questions on the homework for next week, or for 2 weeks? I'm sorry.
I don't have a question on that, but I do have a question. When you present this to an organization, Alicia, and you have more time, how long is your presentation?
It's usually an hour. It's usually an hour because we actually do some exercises.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good. All right. So in wrapping up, we'll be talking about the processes that Alicia has challenged us to come back into, and we have some specific examples. And it sounds like, Paul, you're figuring out as well what are the obstacles and such going. Donna, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just want to, I've got to run, but I just want to clarify, Alicia. I understand the 3 steps, really helpful and clear. When you say we're identifying the person, or are we identifying the role? Like defining the role?
The role. And I'm so glad you asked that question, because people will come and go.
Right.
But it's important to put the name of the role or the position. Yes.
So it could be job specifications or title or a combination thereof.
Correct.
Okay.
So CEO, director, sales manager, office manager, things like that.
Not crazy, busy entrepreneur that does it all. Not that.
Exactly.
Before we wrap up, Ryan or Sabine, any questions? I know Lee can't talk, but Ryan or Sabine, any other thing you want to bring up?
No, nothing for me. Thanks, Alicia, for the presentation.
Oh, you're welcome.
I will try
so
on my
much.
homework. I'm still in the solo entrepreneur doing everything mode, but I will certainly try.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
And Ryan, anything else to bring up?
Really appreciate your time, Alicia, and help for setting it up. Thank you.
Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Alicia.
Okay.
Looking forward to seeing you in 2 weeks.
Okay, thank
Take care.
you. Take care, everyone. Bye.